Okay, so this is where we stopped yesterday, but I want to go back to the other page because I think in a couple of classes I forgot to do one thing. When we were talking about the exterior angle theorem, so the bottom of the second page, when we set this up right here, we have to justify why we got to set it up. And I know I missed that at least in this class, whatever class this was that I saved. But when I was able to say 126 equals 6x minus 1 plus 5x plus 17, that's because I used what? The exterior angle theorem. So that's my reason here. We could just say this is the exterior angle theorem. Okay? So we did that. Okay. I wasn't sure. I didn't know when I saved this, but I know I missed that at least in some classes. So, oops. You may or may not have that written there. But just make sure that you have a justification for all of your setups. Same thing here. I have a bad feeling that I may have missed this on a class too. I don't know. But when you do this, the reason we got to do that is because it was the third angle theorem. Okay. Your justifications should usually be pretty simple and obvious, something that that's why you know what to do. So it's nothing crazy complicated. But okay. Then on to the last example. All right, so this says in triangle WXY, the measure of angle X is 4 degrees less than twice the measure of angle W. The measure of angle Y is 24 degrees less than 3.5 times the measure of angle W. Find the measure of angle Y. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff all at once, right? We've got this triangle WXY. What do you know about the sum of the interior angles of a triangle? What's the sum of the interior angles of any triangle? Go to 180 degrees. So if I have triangle WXY and this naming the angles this way, then that means that I know that the measure of angle W plus the measure of angle X plus the measure of angle Y has to equal 180. You agree with that? Okay, so if I'm expected to actually find the measure of angle Y, I can't actually find a number based on that. So I have more than one variable, which means I'm going to need more than one equation, which means in the end, it technically is a system. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be anything crazy hard, but I've got to have more equations or I can't get anywhere, right? So that's where we go back, and so that's basically this part. So then we go back and reread the rest of it. All right, so then it says the measure of angle X is 4 degrees less than twice the measure of angle W. Does that sound like something we could use to write an equation? Yes, okay. So the measure of angle X, so measure of angle X is, what does is mean in math? Equals 4 degrees less. What do I write down? -4. Than plus twice the measure of angle W. 2 times the measure of angle W. So that's all this sentence. That make sense to you? You see how we just translated it from English to math. Okay, you don't take it all at once and freak out because it's something you have to write an equation for. All right, so before we do the next part, this has a mixed number in it, okay? We don't like those. Don't want to make it into a decimal. I want to make this into an improper fraction. So what would this become? 7/2. That way I can just go ahead and substitute it in that way and it'll be better. All right, so then it says the measure of angle Y. All right, measure of angle Y equals, is, right? 24 degrees less. So what do I write down? -24. Then 3.5 times, or 7/2, times the measure of angle W. And that gives us all of this. Now, so we started off with that green equation, had 3 variables. If I have 3 variables, I have to have a minimum of 3 equations. Do I have that? Do I have 3 different equations I wrote? Yes. 1, 2, 3, right? A total of 3. I don't have to have 3 extra ones. But as long as I don't add a different variable in there, I'm good. So if you look at what you have, I would say elimination, probably not how we want to go, right? But would substitution make sense here? Yes, because I've got the measure of angle X. All of this is equal to the measure of angle X, so it can go in right there. All of this is equal to the measure of angle Y, so it can go in right there. That make sense? So I start with the measure of angle W plus, instead of writing the measure of angle X, I'm going to use what it's equal to, what I'm substituting in, plus -4 plus 2 times the measure of angle W. Everybody with me? Because this came from my green equation. This came from my purple equation. Then, instead of writing the measure of angle Y, that is what's equal to the measure of angle y. So negative 24 plus 7/2 times the measure of angle w. So that came from pink one again. And that equals 180. And that came from the green part. Okay? Everybody okay with where everything came from? So now we just have to combine our like terms. It looks a whole lot worse than it really is. This is at a time where, you know, I'm sure you were shown at some point when you're combining like terms to circle all the ones that are the same or underline them or whatever. And I know a lot of y'all don't do that anymore. Some of you do. But when you've got a ton of stuff, not a bad idea just so that you don't miss anything or use the wrong thing. So I'm going to combine my like terms. So if I just look at my numbers first, let's just take those. There's the measure of angle W. We've got this negative 4 here. There's 2 times the measure of angle W. And I've got this negative 24. And then that's 7/2 times the measure of angle W. But if I just combine those two, what does that give me? Negative 28. Okay. So then the other things that are left on the left-hand side of the equal sign all have the measure of angle W on them. So basically it's the same variable, right? So I can combine all of those. What is here, even though they don't look like there's a number? There's a 1, right? There's a 2 here, there's a 7/2 here. So I've got to combine them. One of them has a fraction on there. So what do I need? Common denominator. My common denominator would be what? 2. So 2 actually changes to what? 4/2, right? And this 1 that really is there but not there, that just becomes 2/2, right? So see, I got my common denominators. Do I add up all the denominators and get 6? No. Okay, the denominator is still going to be 2. So I have something over 2 times the measure of angle W. So this is 2 plus 4 is 6, plus 7 more gives me 13. So I get 13/2 times the measure of angle W minus 28. Everybody with me? Okay, what else do I need to write there? Equals 180. Don't lose the fact that you have an equation. Things always look way worse than they really are, okay? If they look bad at all. So now what I'm trying to solve for the measure of angle W, right? What do I do next? Add 28 to both sides. So that's going to give me 13/2 times the measure of angle W equals what? 208. So trying to get measure of angle W by itself. Since this is multiplication, you're dividing by 13/2. When you divide by a fraction, you actually multiply by what? The reciprocal. So I'm going to get that the measure of angle W is equal to 208 208 times, well, I can put it over, times 2/13. So not a bad idea to put that over 1. You can reduce before you multiply. I know that confuses some people, so we can just multiply straight across. And that's going to give me 416/13. Then we got to try and reduce it, right? So how many times does 13 go into 41? 3 times, with how much left over? 2. So that would give me 26. Can 13 go into 26? Yes. So the measure of angle W is equal to what? 32 degrees. There you go. We're not? What are we looking for? Find the measure of angle Y, right? Okay, so now I've got to plug that in. Y'all are not a room, right? You have some room there. But I can't see it. So then I've got to, let's see, what? So I'm going to plug it in to here. So the measure of angle Y equals negative 24 plus 7/2 times the measure of angle W, which is 32. Now, remember, you can multiply before you reduce, or you can reduce and then multiply, right? So I could multiply, I could put this over 1, and I can multiply 7 times 32 and then divide it in half, but can I reduce that before I multiply? Yes, I can, because 2 goes into 2 once, goes into 32 how many times? 16. So that means I'm going to get then that the measure of angle Y equals, we'll keep that at negative 24. And really just 7 times 16. So what's 7 times 10? 70. What's 7 times 6? 42. 70 and 42 is 112. Okay. So since I am adding two numbers and the signs are different, am I really adding or am I really subtracting? Really subtracting, keeping the sign of the larger one. Okay, so I have 112. Okay, I can start by subtracting 20, or I can start by subtracting 4, doesn't matter which one you subtract first. 20, okay. So 112 minus 20 gives you what? 92. Then you subtract 4 more and you get 88. So the measure of angle Y equals 88 degrees. Okay. Oh, so much work. That ain't nothing. That's some work I can show y'all later on when you really start complaining about stuff. Any questions at all? But you can't get lost in your work. If you don't know what's what when you're doing this stuff and you just have random numbers all over the place, you're never going to be able to keep up with it. If you keep up with it and your stuff is actually labeled as to what's what, you can totally keep up with and do it. This is just basic arithmetic. Okay, we good? Any questions? Awesome.